Hi, Temple St. Clair here, and I am so excited to be doing this for Croghan's in Charleston, South Carolina. It's a rainy, blustery fall evening in New York City, and all I can think is it must be much more lovely to be in Charleston right now. Um, I'm so happy to do this. It's a little bit of my, pandemic love letter to Charleston and to Croghan's. I've been working with Croghan's for many, many years and love the Croghan's family. My mother actually was a very good friend of Mary Ramsey. And my relationship with South Carolina and Charleston goes way back to my teens when my family moved from Virginia to South Carolina. And then eventually my mother moved to Charleston, South Carolina. So Charleston is one of those places that is kind of part of me, part of my early formation. My mom lived there from, I guess, most of my early 20s. And at that point, I was living full time in Florence, but I would come back and Charleston was home. And actually, my mother restored a very beautiful house, 15, I believe it's number 15 Legree Street, just up the block from the Swords Gate and across the street from the Pineapple Gate House, so across from some very beautiful historic homes. And I remember so fondly of either walking down King Street, walking from south of the Battery onto King Street to explore the antique shops and or venture by bicycle. I took some classes at College of Charleston. I took some classes in the fine arts department there, some drawing classes and painting classes that I don't think you actually know about. But Charleston again was really, yes, it's very much part of me. And discovering Croghan's back then, before I even started doing what I was doing, was amazing, like walking into a magical treasure trove. And today, still, Croghan's for me represents King Street and what King Street was, and this heritage and tradition that carries on there through Croghan's and through generations of your family working there. So very meaningful for me, and I'm very honored to be able to keep some of my history and my relationship going with Charleston through Croghan's. Unfortunately, I've been able to visit less during this period of time. I was supposed to be there in September for a big family wedding. I still have family in Charleston. I have wonderful cousins. Some of them you may know. Ann and Carrie Burnett live across the bridge in Ion in Mount Pleasant, and Doug Lee down south of Broad. So many good friends and family still there. So I look forward to coming back down when I can. And I think the wedding that did happen in Charleston last week was just a very, very, very small, intimate family affair. But there's going to be big festivity that'll be in Charleston in the spring. So I'm looking forward to that. Charleston is it holds a place in my heart in terms of its classicism, the architecture. Certainly I enjoyed the whole process of my mother restoring a house there. But Drayton Hall stands out as one place that I go back to over and over again when I visit Charleston. The fact that Drayton Hall is a historic home that just celebrates the architecture and the spaces and the volumes of space and the light there on the Ashley River. It's a magical place for me, and a magical place for how it is preserved with no furnishing. That just these beautiful empty rooms of incredible proportion that relate back to a lot of my early classical studies in Italy, studying Palladio, and of course being from Virginia and knowing Monticello well. The Southern architecture is something so important to me, and I think really does form certain of my early aesthetic. I'm going to refer to some notes this evening just because I don't want to miss anything, and you all sent me such great questions. But one of them was also talking about a little bit of my background. I did grow up in the South, but then I went north to school and to Europe to school. I went to Switzerland in high school, and then I came back and I went to Smith College up in Massachusetts. And I don't think I've ever, Smith College is a women's school. and long tradition of educating young women. And I don't think it's been as important to me as it has been lately, with so many things going on, and really the development of women and the rights of women and the opportunities for women have come so much to the forefront even recently, which seems crazy, but it's really come out so much more of how proud I am that I went there, and I am proud of the young women coming out of Smith these days. In fact, I just received the Smith Journal about a week ago, and I learned that a group of engineers trained at Smith won a competition recently that was given to different groups of academics to create a new ventilator for COVID. And a group of Smith women engineers won that competition. They developed a ventilator made in a way that is economically easy to produce with off-the-shelf parts. And they were shocked themselves that they won. So I think that's wonderful. I'm a big believer still in, the education, very focused education of women and giving women that voice to excel on their own. And, without really realizing it, I guess I did that as well, because I started my business in my 20s. And as I say, I was living in Italy, but I would come back to Charleston, and probably to my mother's, my mother's shock, I have an entrepreneurial side of me that I like to sell things, or rather share things. So I started coming back to Charleston, and really my very first pieces sold in Charleston. I was selling ancient coin jewelry, things that I was doing in Florence, collecting ancient coins and having them set by my goldsmiths in Florence. And some Charlestonians were my very, very first collectors. So as I say, my history with Charleston goes back quite far. I've been doing what I do now. I've been designing jewelry and have my own company since the mid-'80s. So going on 35 years now. When I designed my first amulet, so that came after the Roman and Greek coins that I was using to set in jewelry. So the very first amulet that I designed was inspired by a collection, a very personal and private collection that belonged to Lorenzo il Magnifico, that he collected during the Renaissance. And this collection was featured in an archaeological museum in Florence. And so I designed my first rock crystal amulet. And when asked what my favorite piece of jewelry is, probably to this day, the rock crystal amulet that I do in many different themes is perhaps my most favorite jewel. And I wear mine every single day. And I introduce new ones with each new collection. And the rock crystal amulet, I think, has become a very important part of my collection and such a signature piece. Not only because just the rock crystal set in gold, something about the simplicity and classicism of the piece speaks to people, but at the same time, it is representative of really the first jewel, the first form of human adornment. If you think what early woman or man might have put around their necks, a small stone, a feather, an amulet, a charm, a talisman, these were really, the first forms of personal jewels that anyone wore. So I think that's part of why my amulet has become such a signature piece for me. And I know one thing that you say you love is the craftsmanship and the quality, and the secret to creating jewelry that literally appeals to all ages and becomes an heirloom to pass down. And I think that is certainly part of the Croghan's culture. I know that you work with people generation to generation and helping people find beautiful jewels that are very meaningful. And I think that my jewels, I think part of it is that there is a modern classicism. And if I say I go back to the architecture of the South, the neoclassical architecture, these things that are so timeless. You see details of the architecture in the South coming from things that you see in the Mediterranean, whether Roman or Greek. So I think in my jewelry, they're modern classics. I've always said they're modern classics. They too are sort of timeless. And I think that is the great appeal, that you can collect them and wear them and layer them, and they really never go out of style. Turquoise is something I know that you'll have asked about, and I think you've been very successful with the Croghans. I put a turquoise pair on today of earrings. And turquoise for me is new this last season. And I've used turquoise in the past, but sometimes I go back and forth between what I use, and sometimes I bring back things that I love. And certainly turquoise for me it's a beautiful, vibrant color. It probably goes back to teenage years of traveling with my mother in the Southwest and collecting Native American jewelry. Yet the way I am addressing turquoise is, again, in a much more modern, classic, simple way. But I just love how turquoise can be, like, it's sort of wintry almost outside today here in New York, but what better thing to put on than this happy, beautiful color? So turquoise is probably going to stay with me now, and I'm going to explore more ways of using it. I love mixing it with my classic blue moonstone. I think it is so beautiful and classic and yellow gold. So it's something that you're going to see more from me and more as I mix it with other gemstones, even with emerald, ruby. Of course, here they're just with a little bit of diamond. So they're becoming another classic for me. One other question that you will ask for me: is there any treasure, any gemstone that I missed, that I didn't get to keep, or that I didn't get to work with? And sometimes this happens. Sometimes there's an incredible gemstone. I work in sort of 3 different layers of jewelry. I do my fine jewelry, which is where you find the rock crystal amulets, these turquoise earrings, my classic royal blue moonstone, and many of my classic pieces that you know, the angels. And then I work in a high jewelry and an haute couture level. And at the high jewelry level, the gemstones can be extremely rare and often very, very dear. So sometimes, if I don't necessarily have a particular client in mind, I might not be able to take in a certain gemstone. And I must say, this happened, I can only name a couple of times, really. And one in particular, though, was a very large, and I mean large, like maybe this size, Australian black opal from Lightning Ridge. Australian black opal is the rarest form of opal on Earth, and it only comes mined from Lightning Ridge, Australia, which is this place way out in the middle of nowhere. And over the years, over these 35 years, I have incredible relationships with gem dealers and cutters and miners. So we have families from Lightning Ridge that we work with, and every now and then they'll pull a piece out that they've been holding in their family for years and give us access to it. So this occurred a few years ago, and one miner's daughter literally came to New York and brought me this incredible stone that was literally about this big and looked like a peacock feather. Fabulous piece where, to me, it was such a treasure that really you would set it very, very simply and even just wear it on a leather cord. It was this incredible talisman, this incredible treasure. Well, a little tricky to explain because it was quite large, and as I say, it was very, very dear. Well, we did not get to keep that piece and work with it, but I am honored to know that it actually ended up in a museum. There's an incredible gemstone and mineral museum in Lebanon. And so it ended up actually in this museum in Beirut. So that means I haven't been to Beirut yet, but I would love to go, and I can go visit that piece. Otherwise, most pieces that we've come across, we've managed to have access to, and we do have wonderful collectors, some certainly through Croghan's, that are always looking for these very, very amazing, one-of-a-kind pieces. The latest collection is a labor of love. And I can show you here. You might not be able to see it in my video, but you can go to Croghan's and see it. There is a new amulet, and this is called the Astrid Amulet. And I don't know if you can't see it that clearly here, but it has a little bit of diamond and it has engraving on a couple of sides. Now, when I was in Florence, the first time, I went for my junior year abroad, and then I went back and did my master's in Renaissance literature. And of course, when you're studying Italian literature, you have to study Dante. Now, Dante, the writer, the epic poet, 14th century poet, writer of the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy is a massive work that many scholars spend full lifetimes reading. And generally, as an undergraduate, you read the Inferno, and you don't get much farther than that. But the Divine Comedy is written in 3 books: the Inferno, Purgatory, and then Paradiso. And Dante himself places himself as the protagonist of this poem. And he basically makes the trip deep into the Inferno. With his guide is Virgil, the classic poet. Then he makes his way through Purgatory, and then finally he makes his way through Paradiso. Paradiso, interestingly enough, the structure of Paradiso is based on the Ptolemaic hypothesis. I think you might be familiar with my Ptolemaio. This is the smaller version, but the full Ptolemaio shows all the orbits of the different planets. So in the poem of Paradiso, literally Dante is traveling from Earth out to all the outer planets, past Saturn is the last planet of orbit that they were aware of in the 15th century. So in the poem, he travels out past Saturn. He has this cathartic voyage through Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradiso. And when he arrives at Paradiso, the last line of the poem, of this massive work, is, in Italian, Amor che muove il sole e le altre stelle. And what does that mean? What is this moment, this illuminating moment at the end of that poem? Basically, Dante is saying it is love that moves the universe. It is love that moves il sole, the sun, e le altre stelle, the other stars. So there's so many interpretations. Just the last 4 lines of the Divine Comedy probably have hundreds of pages written about them. But in simple terms, basically Dante is stating that no matter your belief system, when things are going wrong with humanity, look to the greater universe. The greater universe moves on, and basically love conquers all. So to me, what a message for today. So this collection, I play in the natural world. I like to play in the cosmic world of my designs. So this particular collection is an extension of my celestial collection, and it's in 3 chapters. And the first part is called Astrid. And these have, again, this engraving, Amor che muove il sole e le altre stelle, on these pieces. So you'll need to go to Croghan's to see them closely, because they're quite beautiful. These pieces are made both in Florence and with some of my other incredible artisans that I work with. And they're very special. They're very special to me because they take me back to my early studies in Florence, and then they take me forward as a new rock crystal amulet within my collection. So that is the new Astrid collection. Astrid, by the way, that title, that word is a Scandinavian word. Sometimes every now and then you run into a young woman named Astrid. It's a very beautiful word. It means divine beauty. And actually, Astrid, it looks like if it were from a Latin root, it looks like it would be something that had to be astrological or have to do with the stars. But it's actually not. It just has to do with this meaning of divine beauty. But it seemed like a perfect title for something so cosmic and beautiful. So during our lockdown period, I felt such a need, and I still do now, and so this is lovely being able to come on with you all at Croghan's, such a need to connect, because so much of my work and so much of the work in the jewelry world is about connection and about relationship. So during the lockdown, I was coming onto Instagram and doing an Insta Live feed every Wednesday. And you can actually go to my Instagram and go to the IGTV, and you can go and listen to some of these. I talked about collections that I've done and various themes. I work in different, my collections, my fall and spring collection are different, usually thematic. So I talked about some of those, talked about being at home during the pandemic, talked about my roof garden, which is probably was such a savior during this whole period and still continues to be. I'm very lucky in New York. I live in the East Village, which is an incredibly vibrant, very neighborhoody part of town here in Manhattan. And I'm very lucky to have some outdoor space. So during this whole time, especially when we could not go out into the world, I was on my roof a lot. And I grow a lot of perennials there, a lot of indigenous drought-resistant flowers. And then this year I started growing lots of some vegetables and lettuces and tomatoes and peppers and all sorts of things. And it was just such a comfort to be able to go there. So that's another thing I love about Charleston is sort of the secret gardens and going and peeking down different gateways, down different alleyways within the city. My mom's house on LeGray Street, she had a beautiful sort of parterre formal garden and then sort of a wilder garden in the back. So gardens are very important to me and something I love about Charleston. And also another question during this time, as you see behind me, this is a little bit of my library here at my studio. I have a library at home too that's very important to me, sort of another place that I retreat. And here in my studio I collect, and some of them are at home too. I have a collection of jewelry books on jewelry history, on coin history, the history of gold, the history of symbolism and alchemy. But for my reading pleasure, I read all sorts of things. And so I'm sure everybody's been busy reading during the pandemic. I certainly have. But I just recently read a beautiful biography of Alvin Ailey. Also felt very timely during this time. And there's some connections there too. My husband, Paul, was a modern dancer, and he's worked with me for quite a few decades, at least 2. And he introduced me to modern dance. At least he educated. I had seen a lot of modern dance, but I had never really learned about modern dance. And Paul had danced with modern dance companies in New York City and studied with Merce Cunningham. And at one point he introduced me to Alvin Ailey. I got to be friends with some of the people working at Alvin Ailey. I've been invited to rehearsals, which is pretty much one of my favorite New York activities to do. And I may be doing some more partnerships and working with them, but I really wanted to delve in and understand more about Alvin Ailey himself, who of course is no longer with us, but was an incredible artist. Grew up in Texas, born in the 1930s, made his way first to Los Angeles and then to work in New York in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He toured the world. He was a black gay man working as an artist in the 60s and 70s, and an incredibly forward thinker. And if you'd heard that he was working today, you'd think, oh my gosh, he was a visionary. He was certainly a visionary for his time. He embraced the arts. He embraced other artists. What I've learned about him that's so interesting and so forward thinking is that he wanted to create a repertoire, and he wanted to support other choreographers. And it's been a fascinating biography. I've just finished it. And I am sort of thinking about what I'm going to read next, whether another biography or a novel. I delve into both, but I've been sort of re-delving into the 14th century Italy, so back into Dante, back into Boccaccio, and things I studied before. But so that's where I go. I am a researcher, an explorer, and love storytelling, love relationships, love connecting the dots, love these long-term partnerships, whether in my work, both with places like Croghan's and with my incredible stone dealers from around the world, with my artisans in Florence who are basically like my brothers, and they're back working now. And it's an interesting time, not the easiest, but so important, and I'm so appreciative of some social media. I'm not appreciative of all of it, but the social media that allows us to reach out and connect. So I'm so happy to be able to reach out and explain my connection with Croghan's and my history with Charleston, and I look forward to seeing you. Look for me on my own Instagram, and look for me on the Croghan's Instagram and on their social media, and I look forward to seeing you in person very soon. Meanwhile, I hope everyone stays well and stays safe and reads great books and contemplates beautiful things and watches artists and watch the art that is being created right now. And as I like to say, live life beautifully. Appreciate all that's around you and your family and all great things. Thank you so much.